Hi, I'm Jake Pannington, Customer Care Coordinator at Structureworks, and I'm going to show you how to install a pergola column on a patio or footer using our TensionRod mounting system. The tools you'll need for this installation are a pencil, a torpedo level, a 4-foot level, a measuring tape, a socket wrench with 9/16" socket and 3/4 inch deep socket, a 9/16" open end wrench, an impact driver with Phillips and square drive bits, a 5/16" nut driver bit, a drill, a 5/8" by 8" masonry drill bit, a 3/16" masonry drill bit, a circular saw with an abrasive blade, Sika anchor fix epoxy, a shop vacuum, some painter's tape, and finally an 8-foot high step ladder. We recommend using 2. Once you've measured and squared the pergola layout, you're ready to install the first column. Using a drill with a 5/8" masonry drill bit, drill a 6-inch deep hole straight down into the concrete patio or footer. Remember, if you're installing your pergola on a paver patio, please be sure to have a footer installed for each column, as pavers are not an acceptable anchor for a pergola. After drilling, use the shop vac to remove all of the concrete dust and particles from the hole. This will help the epoxy grip the concrete properly. Visually check that you haven't drilled through your patio slab or footer. If you have, you'll want to add sand to the bottom of the hole so that the epoxy doesn't seep out. The next step is to add the epoxy and set the threaded rod. I recommend doing this next step for each column in succession so the epoxy doesn't have time to harden in the tube. To add the epoxy, start by inserting the nozzle of the tube as deep into the hole as possible and slowly retract while filling the hole with epoxy. Then insert the 1/2 inch threaded rod into the hole using a twisting motion so the epoxy flows into the threads of the rod. Keep the rod threads as clean as possible and make sure to remove any excess epoxy from around the base of the rod before it hardens. You will have approximately 12 inches of threaded rod above the patio surface once completely inserted. Allow the epoxy to cure according to the directions before moving on to the next step. While waiting for the epoxy to cure, install the leveling studs and nuts into the 4 holes on the column leveling plate. Use 1 nut on the top side of the plate and 1 on the bottom side of the plate for each stud. Once the epoxy has cured, place the column leveling plate over and down the threaded rod. Using the 4 leveling studs and a torpedo level, make sure the plate is level as it will ensure that the column is plumb when installed. It's easiest to make initial adjustments by lifting the plate and turning the leveling studs by hand. However, as you get to the final adjustments, an open end wrench works best. Once the plate is level, tighten the top and bottom leveling stud nuts to ensure each stud is secured. Then add a nut and washer to the threaded rod and tighten with a wrench to secure the plate. The column leveling plate has 4 small holes to allow for installation of Tapcon screws to further prevent column leveling plate movement. Use the holes as a guide to drill pilot holes, then secure the 4-inch Tapcon screws. Lastly, add a 1/2 inch hex nut and then the coupler by threading it halfway onto the threaded rod. It will be used to connect the long threaded rod once we have the column set in place. Tighten the hex nut and coupler together so that the coupler won't turn when installing the long threaded rod. Now we'll set the column, but before we do, remember 2 things. First, you need to square the bottom of the column before setting it onto the column leveling plate. Apply painter's tape to the column for marking as well as to protect the surface of the column from being scratched while you square the column. Also, be sure to add the base trim to the bottom of the column before setting it in place. Once the column is set into the leveling plate, add the long threaded rod from the top of the column and connect it to the coupler. Make sure the long threaded rod is fully tightened into the coupler. Next, add the mid trim if included, the column capital and top mounting plate, pergola adapter block, storm load washer, flat washer, and hex nuts. Be sure to tighten the hex nuts according to the instructions received with your pergola kit. hope this helps speed your pergola installation, and remember, if you have any questions about the installation process, please contact us at structureworksfab.com.